continue to have a very interactive discussions. Your contribution to this discussion would be highly appreciated, as you remain one of our key and valued for a society or a future where women, girls, and children and the LGBTQI plus community enjoy their rights and freedoms. Let me start by inviting Dr. Rudo Chugudu from the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. You have been identified, I guess, to set the scene for us. She will take on shaping the discourse on human rights from a human rights through the intersectional lens, as well as amplifying voices for the LGBTQI community. Dr. Chigudu, let me invite you to take us through. Thank you.
Good afternoon and thank you. It is an absolute pleasure to be part of what I feel is quite a key conversation. Afternoon to everyone, and I will shortcut and say all protocols observed. My role, as has been stated, really is just to talk a little bit about the interaction between the human rights framework and intersectionality as a frame or as an approach. And the beauty of it is, I think a lot of what I would say has already been said, but I will just say, I think it is an absolutely critical issue to be engaging with the subject of gender-based violence, and specifically focusing on a category of people that triggers divisions, not only in South Africa, but across the continent, in communities and in families. And so the task of bringing a human rights framework where so much tension exists, is that the approach, the human rights approach, needs to do far more than just simply tell people an inherent right to dignity and protection from harm. In this contentious territory where we often find the LGBTQI plus category, where we find that sometimes the very articulation of human rights themselves becomes the trigger for violence. And so when we are thinking about lending a human rights framework to this category, I think there's just a little bit more work that needs to be done, a little more intentionality that is needed, that places us in a position where we are looking beyond merely what policy says, merely what a human rights framework states. So I'll backtrack a little bit here and hope that this is not to patronize, because I assume that we have an understanding of intersectionality, but just in line with the theme also to ensure that no one is left behind. Intersectionality as a concept was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, if I'm not mistaken, to describe precisely what's already been stated, which is the coexistence of race, class, gender, amongst other characteristics, and the ways they overlap with each other. That said, the idea of intersectionality existed long before that, and I think Crenshaw is known for coining the term, but the understanding of the existence of multiple characteristics was not a new phenomenon when she coined the term. We are a range of things as we stand at any given moment, rather than any one thing. So if we were looking, for example, at Africa, they would invariably be raced in one way, classed, gendered, geographically located. So when we think about them and their educational needs or their progression, these markers would likely impact their realities and their experiences. And so when having a conversation about the LGBTQI category, we're saying essentially the same is true. any individual who identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, anything across the spectrum or the category would simultaneously identify as numerous other things. And what I want to emphasize is that what is key for us to understand is not the layering of marginality or the production of a most oppressed people. And when I say not trying, we are not trying to come up with who is most oppressed. So by virtue of the fact that I am Black, that I am poor, that I am lesbian, that I am, right? So the idea is not to just to layer these different identities. The idea is to understand that each of these identities acts in a unique way on an individual. But more importantly, when they intersect, there's something unique and particular that has happened. And I think in terms of the history, this is what was being said. Kimberly Crenshaw talks about how, in thinking about Black women in the US, that there was a category for advancement for Blackness, and it was largely Black men who were being seen in the labor force as a result of this pro-Black approach. And similarly, there was a pro-woman approach, and it was largely white women that were being advanced. And for Black women, it was a combination of being both Black and woman. That meant that they were failing to benefit from what had been articulated as they were Black and they were also women, and there were these advancements that were being made for Blackness and for womanhood. But for them, the fact that they were falling into a unique category, right? They formed a unique slice where, in terms of Blackness, it was men that were being advanced. In terms of womanhood, it was white women that were being advanced, and they were slipping through the cracks. And so for me, when I'm thinking about the LGBTQI category, it's saying, what is it in our thinking, in our approaches, that needs to be fully cognizant or fully aware of the systemic and the historical oppressions and injustices that exist, that enables us not just to identify people as marginalized, but gives us an entry point, a lens, a route, gives us a firm grip into thinking about how do we start to repair these injustices, because they are historical and they are systemic. They are not surface level issues. And so when I say this, again, using the example of gender, when you are looking at deeply gendered phenomena, I think one of the gendered phenomena that I often refer to is when I think about the law. People will often talk about how advancements in gender mean that we have more gender sensitive laws in existence. But when you look at the history of the formation of law in itself, is that the law itself is androcentric. It was designed to see what it recognized as citizens. And at that time, what it saw as citizens were men. And so as the law was being crafted, even the kind of psychology and thinking that it was crafted around was very androcentric. It's centered around males. And one key example for me when I'm thinking about criminal law is this description of crimes of passion. When people talk about premeditation versus a instantaneous crime of passion, where the male psyche was constructed around this idea that in the immediacy of a trigger, a violent reaction was accommodated. So when in criminal law, when people are looking at the psyche and they say somebody was triggered in that moment, impulsively reacted, and caused the death of another human being. But when you look at women, and I'm talking here generalizing in terms of the psychology, is that there's a slow burn where increasingly, cumulatively, the harm that is being done to them is being absorbed and absorbed and absorbed and absorbed, and eventually can lead into an act of violence. And when that act of violence is exercised, it is seen as this vicious, premeditated act, unlike the instantaneous act of an angered man who is responding in. And so even when you think about how both of them will be considered crimes, but when you think about the gravity with which each one is treated, you see that there's a sensitivity, there's a leniency that comes in the absence of this premeditation. But the point is that it's rooted deeply in an understanding of psychology and a human psyche that isn't general to humanness, but it was unique to maleness at that time. And so when we think about offsetting, when we think about intentional ways of amplifying voice, of seeing, of reducing harm, we are saying we live in societies where over time we have absorbed and absorbed and absorbed ways of being around race, around class, around gender that continue to manifest. And when these interact, we are seeing serious acts of violence or major vulnerabilities and marginalization that isn't often talked about. I'll give the example of, I hate the phrase myself, but I will use it for this purpose, the subject of corrective rape, where the idea that what is being seen, and I'm using air quotes here, as sexual deviance in women. So same-sex activity between women, amongst women, when that is received as deviant, and you see this act of violence in the form of rape. And it's a unique form of violence that is exercised on female identified or biologically female subjects, humans. And so for us, when we are thinking about the ways in which we respond to the LGBTQI category, we are saying a privileged middle class gay white man, a poor, unemployed Black gay man, a lesbian living with a disability versus an able-bodied lesbian. All these characteristics, markers, nuance the realities and the experiences of individuals within this category. And so when we think about ways of tackling race, class, gender, or when we think about work that advances the rights and needs of a category like the LGBTQI category, it is important to see where these intersections exist. Because when we see them in that way, we're able to say that it's okay in one moment to say we are creating a provision for lesbian women. But which lesbian women are able to access that kind, which kind of lesbian women have that kind of access? So the likelihood of a middle-class educated Black woman and the ability to use their social class, their education, to gain employment or to maintain employment is very different from that of a less educated or for a working class individual. And so I think for me, the important thing to highlight today is this idea that intersectionality does more than just tell us that we are layered as individuals. That's an initial starting point. It's a critical starting point. But it takes us a little bit further by saying to us, when we see this range of characteristics of markers, what does it allow us to see about kinds of things and approaches that we need if we are to genuinely improve the lives of individuals within the LGBT category? So when we talk about amplifying voices, for example, just in this lumped category alone, we will say LGBTQI. But even in that category, whose voices are predominantly heard? How does power operate to privilege certain categories or certain groups within this broader category? And so the ask for me really is that, can we be more deliberate? Can we pay attention to the operations of power, to the legal failures, to the political failures, to the rhetorical failures in our systems that lead to the privileging of some over others, even where on surface value it looks like concessions are being made or provisions are being given for a category of people. When we say access to loans for women, which women access those loans? When we say greater safety for LGBTQI, or when we say we are giving resources to LGBTQI as a category, who in the category is receiving these resources? And so for me, that is the key thing in terms of an intersectional approach and lens. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chikudu. That was very enlightening. And I think you've outlined the different classification and the extent to which we need to go if we as government has to improve policy and policy implementation. We have been requested, if I can just do that, to say that we need to open our camera when we make the presentation. So I'll start with myself so that you see who it is. And we're now going to move to the Civilian Secretariat for Police Services. As an oversight body, where you are actually providing advice and support in terms of research and to the minister. And given this new approach of intersectionality, would like now to hear to May Dipsy Wenchuemang about the work that they are doing and whether they've also begun to internalize and perhaps conduct some research in terms of ensuring that when we amplify voices of the LGBTQI community, and that the issue of intersectionality is part of their approaches and how they are working around that. May Wenchuemang, if you can then take us through practical steps needed to ensure an inclusive society working in working environment that embraces the issue of intersectionality. Here we're looking at intersectionality as an effective tool for gender-based violence. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. As I've already been introduced, my name is Dipsy Wenchuemang, and I am at the Department of Civilian Secretariat for Police Service. And I would like to just say that and explain maybe what our department does and maybe areas where we can point out areas of improvement, because I would present the work that we do. However, in terms of intersectionality, I don't think we've really been very specific and got into much detail in terms of how the previous speaker has just outlined. And maybe it's perhaps the area that we've got to look at and embrace and, assess how the police are performing on this one. Let me just start off by explaining what our department does. Our department is a department established in terms of Section 2 of 2021, of which the main objective is to play an active oversight role on the performance of police and to serve as the advisor to the Minister on policy matters. I would like to just also indicate that sometimes the work of the police should be understood in terms of dealing with the after effects. I think the minister, you perhaps have heard the minister from time to time to say he cannot police people in their homes, what the people do and so forth. They come as an after effect when the event or something has happened, then they come, take statements and interview people and really be on the after the perpetrators. So sometimes it would seem as if the work that we do is not enough, especially focusing on the LGBT, as has been explained. We must also be cognizant of the fact that the ills of society cannot be resolved by policing alone. It is the ills that start from our homes, how we sort of educate and raise our children to respect the rights of others, to respect the choices of others, and so forth. I would want to elaborate more on this matter before I start off by saying our homes make societies. Communities, our homes make communities, communities make societies, societies make the nation, and the nations make the world or the universe. How we raise our children in terms of respecting others, respecting the rights of others from home, to coexist with others, to share the space and ideas, and not be intimidated by others' ideas and choices is very important. I think that's the bottom line to start off. And these things we might actually take for granted and say, and the parents who are absent, for instance, absent parents, or those parents who are present, but they compensate by giving everything to their children in the name of love, what they want, when they want it, how they want it. We will forever be dealing with these issues, and these are the kinds of things that allow perpetrators to continue to perpetrate the acts of violence against women, but also against the LGBT. Is there any against the categories that we've had earlier on? So, and these are enshrined in our constitution. Our constitution says that everybody has got a choice. And it starts with the choice. Sometimes people are punished for the choices that they make, which is very wrong and which must be corrected from our homes. So I would like to explain also to say that as a department, we oversee the performance of the police and overseeing them on the basis of when the cases are reported to them, what do they do with them? And you can come to us to complain if your case is not taken. That's why I wanted to put into perspective the after effect. We perform oversight through the following. We do research and policy development. And I think this is the area which perhaps we might have neglected, and we've got to sort of zoom in more detail in terms of what are the results of our researchers tell us. Are we even focusing on that? We do legislation. For instance, the DNA regulations that regulate when you've been raped, the firearms, because some of these acts of violence are performed through firearms and so forth, and other dangerous weapons. And we also do partnerships and stakeholder management with the understanding that we cannot resolve the violence of society alone, or we cannot even deal with the perpetrators of these violences alone. And then we monitor. And what we monitor is the implementation of compliance of the Domestic Violence Act. It might be something that may not necessarily zoom in directly into the LGBTI, the LGBTQI. However, we are saying that these are the LGBTQI category is more oppressed. Yes, women are oppressed, and women violence is perpetrated against them. But with the LGBTQI, it's even more on that matter. So we monitor that compliance, which start from home, the Domestic Violence Act. We identify challenges and propose ways of resolving them. And perhaps that is the area that we've got to also go back to our drawing board, if at all the domestic violence doesn't cover that category of people well. We make recommendations on remedial, at times punitive measures for non-compliance with the Act. For example, if I've already explained, if you as a citizen feels that you come to us, and then we take the matter forth until your matter is resolved. One of the ways in which we ensure inclusive society is we inform the citizens on the gender-based violence, how it manifests itself, and about their rights through education campaigns, in visits with the minister and the citizens. We listen to complaints. We listen to others who complain about certain things. We also do these campaigns in provinces, especially the provinces that are wrought with high levels of violence against women, which we have identified as hotspots, such as Free State, GP, KZNW, Western Cape, Northern Cape, Eastern Cape. Some of the acts we also monitor closely are the Sexual Offense Act. And I would just say, maybe before I get to the Sexual Offense Act, explain what the Domestic Violence Act provides. It provides remedies for victims, such as the protection order, arrest of the perpetrator, shelter for the victims. And we must admit that even these shelters are not enough, as they are more concentrated in Gauteng than in the provinces. And I think perhaps we will have to have the shelter for, or shelters for LGBTQI separate, as we've already heard that sometimes the women who are also oppressed somehow, they look down on the LGBTQI category of people. And we have what you call, for instance, the green doors or the Tutuzele centers. The green doors offer shelter for women and their children, which cannot be made public, only known to the police and the Department of Social Development. The reason being, we don't want, if you have been a victim of, of violence against women and the LGBTQI, then when you get that shelter, then somebody who has perpetrated it against you would find you and even do worse damage. So we don't want them to be known. But with the green doors as well, if you are keen to house or to become a green door kind of activist, you can actually approach the Department of Social Development, register there so that these people can find solace at your home, because we don't want each and everyone. Then the Department of Social Development will come to you and they will then investigate and inspect your premises, whether they are secured enough to house and protect the victims and the children, and also this category of people. In terms of the Sexual Offense Act, it also deals with different types of stakeholders, such as the police, the MPA, the family, and provides remedies in terms of the steps to take when you have been sexually violated. For example, there is this post-exposure prophylaxis, or what we call the PEP, which you can be provided with within the next 72 hours if you have been violated. You can be accompanied or referred to by the police to the nearest hospital to receive the necessary help within that 72 hours. And this is actually to ensure that you do not contract AIDS, that the DNA can be taken of the perpetrator and be traced, and you get assisted in terms of the extent of injury. The family and yourself can also receive counseling from professional psychologists and social workers. We also have programs which we work closely and in partnership with groups of men who have taken a stance to say enough is enough, not in our name. For example, such as a march that was organized in the Free State recently and in Western Cape for the youth. So we do some such educational campaigns and educational outreaches. This program also empowers victims economically, that they can gain their financial independence as it is one of those issues that make women stay in a violent relationship. And I just want to indicate that when I say women, I also refer to this category of people because they can also be abused by their partners. And we do not discriminate in terms of who abuses who. So we run these campaigns to educate about the GBV in partnership with other activist groups and community safety policing, community policing forums to support communities. And we also have what we call the 6-point scale, which we evaluate and monitor the implementation of performance of police on the GBV, and they can be summarized as follows. Everybody needs to be respected. When you go to the police station to report a case, respect the person and treat the person with dignity, no matter which category he falls into, whether he's a man, whether he's a woman, whether he falls into the category of the LGBTQI. So everybody must be treated with respect, and it's a right that is enshrined in our constitution. And what we also say is that the investigator or the people that this case is reported to or a case is reported to must talk to the person in the victim-friendly room. We are not in the public eye or in the public ear. We are trying to have all the police stations to have this victim-friendly room so that privacy can be contained. And an investigator must be well trained in handling gender-based violence cases. And I think we can go further and say they must also be trained in the LGBTQI category, how to handle such cases, the sensitivity around being too personal and categorizing people the way that you want and so forth. The incident must be investigated technically and methodically in order to find as much evidence to ensure that the perpetrator is put behind bars. And the fifth point is the investigating police officer must keep the victim informed in terms of the update on the case when it is going to court, etc. What we have found is that people do report these cases to police, but the police sometimes are reluctant or they act as if they are handling the case only to find that they've put it under the shelf. So if you encounter such, you come to us and then we will follow up. We'll get the person who is handling the case number, and we will follow up on that person or even report them to the higher authorities, including the minister. Now, the victim and the family also receive counseling in that regard. We also go further to inspect areas such as taverns and to find out whether there is enough lighting, because if the taverns, for instance, do not have enough lighting and the ablution facilities are not safe, we raise those things and we ensure that even those taverns can be shut down. So we also partner with ambassadors such as Yvonne Chaka Chaka, ambassadors of the GBV, and people of moral regeneration such as Fadam culture and so forth and so on. So we do all the work that we do in partnership with these partners, the ambassadors, and we are open to also partner because we do not have all the answers, to partner with the LGBTQI community so that whatever is short in our acts to cover them should be included and so forth and so on. And as a last shot from my part, I would say that, to be honest, we feel, and I still feel that violence against women actually is escalating. Violence against the LGBTQI category is also escalating. And it doesn't only result in assault, it results even in the killing of women and the LGBTQI people. And 20 years in prison, eating breakfast, lunch, supper, financed by the very victim who may be a taxpayer, is not enough. Maybe more stronger punishment for perpetrators is required. For instance, if we can advocate immediately for a life sentence on the perpetration of these violent crimes against women and the LGBTQI category of people, I think perhaps we would gain something, because people kill you knowing fully well that they are going to be financed by the very family that you have hurt. And a person who goes further after killing you and disassembling your limbs and really putting them in the bag is not enough.
Let me just send you her. I think you have sent emails to her in the past from SAPA. Let me just send you her email.
Can you ask those who are not listening to please mute?
No. I want her to look at it quickly so she can come back. And why I'm saying that she can come back to us with more requests for information. Okay. Just look, Adila, it's double.
Yeah, please continue. I muted her.
Okay, but anyway, that was my concluding remarks, and I was.
Continue. Did we just lose you?
I'm saying those were my concluding remarks, to have more, a stronger punishment for the perpetrators of violence against women and the LGBTQI category. I'll just show my face so that everybody can see who are speaking, and then I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mewen Chuemang, for that informative presentation in terms of the work of the Secretariat. And I think that even highlighting the fact that there is an area that needs to be improved in policing, and it's in terms of empowering the police in terms of how to handle issues affecting the LGBTQ and I plus community. Us in the workplace as well, we try by all means to raise awareness and even to empower ourselves in terms of how to develop a holistic and inclusive program and creating an environment that is very conducive for everybody to perform maximum. And you also remind us that in the workplace, in one of the offices, there was an issue of harassment and discrimination, where a colleague was very clear to say that I want you, I'm a male-looking colleague, but I want you to address me as she. And the mere fact that colleagues continuously addressed that colleague as he was then equated. It was harassment, because you are not treating a colleague in accordance to their preference, but you want to impose your own address upon them. And those are the issues that we're trying to deal with in our workplace, and see how best can we empower colleagues to be able to interact with one another and to create an environment that embraces diversity. And this intersectionality tool, we hope that it will enable us as government departments to be able to go a long way in developing policies that are inclusive. I am now going to call Mr. Tepang Mokokong from the Gender Commission, who will also share with us about practical steps and even the work that they are doing, and whether as well are they also working into intersectionality as a tool for ending gender violence. Mokokong, over to you, if you can take us through the work that the CGE, the Commission for Gender Violence, is engaged in. He is a provincial manager, and I think you are focusing in the Limpopo province as well. Over to you, Ntate Mokoko.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, for giving us an opportunity to speak. Please allow me to greet everyone according to the hierarchy of the institution, all leaders in different directorates and units. Please accept my humble greetings, and leaders from different institutions, colleagues. Thank you so much for logging in. If you were not here, we would not be able to speak. And special greetings and appreciation to Dr. Chikudu from the Center for Human Rights and Medipsi from the Police Secretariat. And thank you so much for speaking before me, because you have given me a lot of insight and work that will enrich our advocacy programs. As they've mentioned, my name is indeed Tepang Mokokong from the Commission for Gender Equality, and I work for the Limpopo province. And since I'm not in Gauteng, I wish I was in Gauteng, because Gauteng has got better opportunities and has got better connectivity. And we know of the digital divide that exists in our country. So I will not be able to open my camera for a long time, because then it will render my network a bit intermittent. So I will open to the name. So I will just open my camera. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm excited to be speaking into this important engagement. And thank you for inviting us. So I'm going to close it now. Thank you. So today we are talking on a very important subject. For me, it's about centering the voices of LGBTQIA+ communities. And please allow me to use the sexual orientation and gender identity groups, because the LGBT term gives me a tongue twister. So I will just use the sexual orientation and gender identity group, which is more inclusive, because in any case, the spectrum is wide in terms of different gender identities and gender expressions. So thank you so much. This is important for us, because it's also about amplifying the challenges that people in the diverse sexual orientation and gender identity groups experience, and how we can use the tool of intersectionality as a tool of analysis in analyzing the lived experiences of persons with different gender identities and sexual orientations. So for me, this engagement, it's an agenda setting for all of us who are in this place, because when we leave this meeting, we will have better insight, we'll have better knowledge, and it will be a start of a conversation of how we can embrace diversity within our institutions, and how we can be inclusive in our development, and how we can be inclusive in everything that we do, and putting gender issues and gender perspectives at the epicenter of every development, because the issue of intersectionality is also about development planning. Are we planning from a human rights perspective? What do I mean by that? I mean that we need to be inclusive in terms of gender, of youth, and of persons with disabilities. So this, for me, it's quite a paradigm shifting engagement, and I sincerely hope that as we move forward, we will have more conversations around this, and that we will heighten this to the strategic level as well. So thank you so much for this important gathering and conversation. So for us as the Commission for Gender Equality, we are a Chapter 9 institution established to promote and protect gender equality. We get our marching orders from the Constitution, from the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, and all other related legislation that really speak and solidify on issues pertaining to gender equality. We get our mandate especially from the Equality Clause, which is Section 9 of our Constitution, which speaks of a society that is free from non-discrimination, and it details all the prohibited grounds of non-discrimination, and sexual orientation is part of that, gender is part of that, disability is part of that, HIV status, pregnancy, and so forth is part of that. So that's where we we derive our mandate as the Commission. And colleagues, today, as we are speaking about this, we also need to ensure that we locate our talk in the broader context of GBV. And I thank the previous speaker and Dr. Chikudu for doing a sterling job in laying the foundation and ensuring that they give us context in terms of where intersectionality comes from, and also context in terms of issues of gender-based violence and the legislative frameworks that are there to respond towards gender-based violence from the SAPS perspective. So, but we need to always ensure that we locate this discussion in the broader context of gender-based violence and femicide within this country, because sexual orientation and gender identity groups form a big part of being victims of gender-based violence. I think in the introduction, the chairperson did mention that we've seen a scourge of violence, hate crimes against persons with different, with diverse gender identities. So we really need to ensure that we continue to ensure that we speak about gender-based violence. And the theme for our commemoration this year is moving from awareness and accountability. For us as the Commission, this is quite an important theme, because it then galvanizes each and every one of us in this room to ensure that we speak truth to power in ensuring that we demand accountability on issues of human rights. I mean, we have frameworks that are put in place, we have policies that are put in place, but it seems that there's some sort of disconnect between landing policy into practice. So this theme calls us to organize ourselves and speak truth to power and demand justice. The issue of intersectionality, it's the issue of social justice, issues around fairness, issues around equality, issues around human dignity, the respect for human dignity, and also in the broader context, or in the bigger scheme of things, issues around economic and reproductive justice. So intersectionality is not only about the violence from a gender-based violence perspective, but it's also about justice, reproductive justice, social justice, and economic justice. So we need to use this tool to ensure that we are able to respond to the challenges that persons with different or diverse sexual orientations and gender identities face in society. So a tool of intersectionality is quite critical, because it gives us a picture of how inequalities are interconnected and how they in turn exacerbate each other. So then it also opens up our mind and to open up our thinking as we are coming with responses, as we are coming with policies and frameworks to ensure that we address the issue of compound discrimination in totality. So intersectionality pushes us to look at the broader picture, to be comprehensive when we deal with issues, and not just to deal with piecemeal issues, because in any case, they are interconnected as much as human rights are interconnected. I cannot have one right and then not have the other right. So we need to ensure that we put this at the back of our mind to know that human rights are interconnected, they are indivisible, and they are inalienable, and they are universal. So we always ought to remember this as we are moving towards using an intersectional lens in the work that we do. This is critical for everything that you do. All planned development, we must do it from an intersectional perspective, because then it gives us an opportunity to respond in a coordinated and a comprehensive manner. So I will just mention a few challenges that persons with diverse sexual orientations and gender identity come across, and you will see that it's quite a range of issues. It's economic issues, it's issues around education. You see, it's different types of discriminations. Dr. Chikudu has already spoken about how intersectionality looks at issues of race, issues of class, issues of gender, issues of disability as well. So we'll see how the community experiences all these forms of challenges, and you can imagine how difficult it is to identify yourself as a person with a diverse sexual orientation and gender identity, because the minute you say that, you are then met with quite a plethora of challenges, and then you have to fight. You are constantly fighting a battle to be recognized in society, over and above the fact that human rights are not a privilege, but are an obligation. So you keep on having to fight this battle. And the challenge is some of the discrimination is systemic. It exists within our institutions where we're supposed to find solutions. That's where we are met with a lot of resistance, a lot of stigma, and a lot of discrimination. So I will then go further to mention the challenges, so that as we are thinking, because I'm thinking that this engagement is not only about talking, but it's the start of a process of how we can ensure that within our institution as DERCO, we can be inclusive in our approach. We can ensure that diversity is put at the epicenter of all development. So some of the challenges that persons with diverse sexual orientations and gender identities experience is the issue of discrimination. I've already mentioned that, but just to say that discrimination is restriction and exclusion and being treated with distinction. So persons within diverse gender identity groups are treated with distinction because of their gender. So they receive differential treatment because of this, and this has quite a blow. People not being able to access residential areas because they've got a different gender identity, or they identify as trans or whatever gender identity they have. So they have a challenge of accessing their residential areas, and therefore that has an impact on their schooling or their experience within the higher education sector, which may lead to a high number of dropouts and school truancy when we're talking about the education sector. So it's a matter of homophobia and bigotry and a deeply entrenched stigma, which then in turn leads to hate crimes. We have seen a lot of hate crimes, and some happen within the sector of higher education, and they go unnoticed, they go unreported. It's something that we need to ponder on as we are moving forward towards ensuring that we have an inclusive society that respects human dignity, and that respects equality, and that respects human rights. Issues around high unemployment rates. If you are not educated, obviously your prospects of getting employment are quite slim. The issue of lack of access to financial services. I think Dr. Chikudu mentioned a critical question. She said that we are saying we are providing financial services and different resources, but the critical question that we need to ask is who is benefiting? Within the LGBTQI plus community, who is benefiting? In terms of women, who is benefiting? That is the critical question that we need to ask ourselves. One other critical challenge that we need to really interrogate is the lack of access to sexual and reproductive health rights or health benefits. And this is because of real or perceived barriers, and some are systemic barriers that exist within the health sector because of the discrimination, because of the cultural influences, because of the religious influences that we carry within these institutions. As people who are supposed to be serving the community, we then in turn forget that we are there to serve regardless of anything. But then in turn, what do? We discriminate As a result, persons with diverse sexual orientations and gender identities cannot access much needed services or health services and sexual and reproductive health services. This also goes to issues of disabilities. I mean, we have a serious challenge in our community of ensuring that we embrace persons with disability and we ensure that there is reasonable accommodation for persons with disability within our spaces, within our institutions. And the social theory on disability says that persons with disabilities are not the problem, but the community is, because we are not wired to embrace and to accommodate persons with disabilities. So those are the issues that we need to ponder on as we move forward and in dealing with this issue. I mean, with the issue of sexual and reproductive health rights, I need to take it a step further to say that in South Africa, we have a challenge of gender reassignment therapy. It's not accessible, and you have trans people who want gender reaffirming surgeries. They need to change to do some gender change surgery. But unfortunately, our health system is not yet wired to ensure that these services are easily accessible. So this is the challenge that we need to really interrogate and deal with as institutions, as the Commission, as well as different institutions that are represented in this important engagement that we are having today. Issues of lack of housing, lack of access to housing, issues of difficulties with accessing protection from SAPS. Already, Dipsy has already delved much into this, but I will not. I will just mention that there's an issue of secondary victimization. We have cases within the Commission around this matter. Also, the issue of lack of access to shelters. Dipsy has already mentioned this, to say that especially during hard lockdowns, persons with diverse sexual orientations and gender identities could not access shelters because of the stigma and the discrimination that exists. And finding how, even though as a woman, I'm a victim of abuse, I can still then victimize another person. So we really, really need to deal with this. The Commission has done a lot of work around access to shelters, and we are continuing to have engagements and discussions with the government, especially the Department of Social Development, in ensuring that there's provision of shelters in our provinces, in our country, because shelters play a critical role in terms of care and support of victims of gender-based violence. Lack of participation in different spaces in the workplace. Our organizational cultures are very toxic. They promote homophobia and misogyny, hatred of women, hatred of persons of same-sex, persons in same-sex relationships. That is the work culture that we carry. It's toxic masculinity at play within the workplace, and we have normalized it as institutions. We've made it acceptable for these things to happen under our watch. But today I am excited because DERCO will be a trailblazer and will take a lead on these issues, ensuring that we eradicate all forms of gender-based violence and discrimination within the workplace. Just to mention a few legislative frameworks that are there, both internationally and in South Africa. I will not delve much because already Dipsy has touched a lot on the frameworks that are there. But internationally, we have the SDGs. In the invitation letter, you have cited the SDGs, the most famous and critical mantra of the SDGs that says we must leave no one behind. That is quite a power-packed mantra, because it tells us that there is no sustainable development if we are leaving people behind, if we are not planning from a human rights perspective that ensures inclusion of gender, youth, and persons with disability. We have a CEDAW, we have Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and others, which, of course, as DERCO, you are very much well aware of. I will not bore you with those details. But what is critical about this instrument is that they push for development of regional and domestic frameworks to create an enabling environment for the promotion of human rights. Regionally as well, we have Agenda 2063, which is about the Africa that we want to see, that sets the development trajectory of Africa. The only criticism I have about that is that though it has nuances of gender equality, it neglects to be intentional and to be specific on issues of LGBTQI+ communities, and it's something that we need to push as people people within that space. So we have that. We have the Constitutive Act of the AU, which speaks of gender equality and human rights and non-discrimination. But what is critical within the African human rights framework is the Maputo Protocol, which is affectionately known as the Women's Constitution. What I like about this protocol is that on Article 19, it speaks about inclusive development. It says that our development must ensure that it has perspectives of gender. National development planning must have perspectives of gender and human rights. It means that we must have human indicators that are gender sensitive, and we must always remember that development is not about infrastructure, but it's about ensuring that people are able to self-actualize. So all development must put people at the epicenter of everything. And in South Africa, we have our constitution, we have different acts. We have the Civil Union Act, which speaks of legalization of same-sex marriages, which promotes and protects the rights of sexual orientation and gender identity groups. We also have recent developments, which are the hate crimes bill. It's still doing the rounds in Parliament. We have also an important policy document that is also doing the rounds in Parliament, which is the identity policy by the Home Affairs, which is quite important because then it wants to remove the gender determinant on our IDs, because that has been a barrier for transgender people who are transitioning from one gender to another or from one sex to another. It was a barrier for them to access services. So the Home Affairs is looking into removing that as a barrier to ensure that our society is inclusive. So basically, South Africa, we are doing very well in terms of putting policies in place, putting legislative frameworks in place, but there is a problem in lending policy into practice, and it's something that maybe we can discuss today. There's so much knowledge in this room. You have experience you can share with us. Why is there no implementation of all these wonderful policies that we are talking about today? Also in Africa, I forgot to mention a very important framework or resolution. It's Resolution 275 by the African Commission, which calls for which is very specific to gender and LGBTQI plus issues. It calls for prohibition of any forms of violence against persons with diverse sexual orientations and gender identity. It calls for a robust investigation and diligent prosecution. This is quite important, as they've already mentioned that some cases are swept under the carpet. Some cases relating to LGBTQI plus communities are not taken serious or are not taken with the much vigor that is needed. So this resolution promotes that establishment of a judicial system that is responsive to the needs of the victims, that speaks to shelters and so forth, and also quite critically the protection of human rights defenders. We have seen how in Africa, in Ghana, in Uganda, how human rights activists are being attacked. And then moving forward with my talk as I move towards closure, we also have our NDP. Our NDP is quite critical. Our National Development Plan that gives us the directive in terms of all development. It makes reference to gender equality and active citizenship. We have our MTSF. I'm actually in love with this document. The 2019 to 2024 MTSF. I think I eat, sleep, and drink this document because it's quite inclusive in its approach. It says, number one, there must be mainstreaming of gender, youth, and persons with disabilities. This, they call it a cross-cutting theme across all those key priorities within the MTSF, and it moves further to say that there must be targets, and gender targets, youth targets, and disabilities targets across all those themes. So across all those important themes, there must be issues of gender equality. And we know that issues of gender identity and sexual orientation are a key component to the discourse around gender equality. And the MTSF then will influence provincial development and growth strategies, and then IDPs and so forth. And then we also have, which as a department, as DERCO, we need to ensure that we implement this important framework, which was approved in 2019, which is the gender responsive planning and budgeting. For me, I call it a silver bullet towards eliminating gender inequality, because then it says all planning in terms of departmental strat plans, in terms of APPs, in terms of operational plans, in terms of budgeting, that must be done from a gender perspective. There must be issues around indicators and targets from a gender perspective, and there must be a budget, because the critical challenge is that we will sit in this engagement, have plans, and then at the end of the day, the plans are not implementable because there is no budget. There is no real budget towards issues of gender equality and inclusion. So this gender responsive planning and budgeting and monitoring and evaluation frameworks calls for gender responsive budgeting across all key areas within your strategic plan and within your APP. So I'm going to ask a question. How far is the Department of DERCO in implementing this important framework? Because it was approved by Cabinet in 2019. That is just food for thought for you colleagues who are employed within DERCO. And we also have the NSP, which is NSP on gender-based violence and femicide, which is quite critical for the discussion today, because it has 6 pillars. Just quickly, as I round up my talk. Number 1, pillar 1 talks of coordination and accountability. It's important to ensure that within our coordination and accountability mechanisms, we ensure that there are issues of sexual orientation and gender identity, or issues of LGBTQI+. How do we do this within our work plans, within our key performance areas? We must have issues around gender equality. We must have issues around human rights. We must have issues around gender-based violence. That is how we will ensure that we have accountability and coordination. Prevention and social cohesion. I'm not going to speak about that. It's quite clear. Responsiveness of the justice cluster. I've already spoken about it. Care and support. I've already spoken about that. Economic power. We must ensure that we put economic power in the hands of persons with diverse gender identities and sexual orientation, because without economic power, they will not be able to participate and they will always be left behind. So to ensure that they are not left behind, let's put economic power into the hands of LGBTQI+ communities, because they are the most marginalized group within society. And also pillar 6 speaks about research and knowledge building. Now, what can we do as a department? I'm just going to mention 6 key things that we can do, and then I will close my talk. Number 1, we need to assess our organizational culture. I've already spoken about this. How responsive is our organizational culture? What is the pulse in terms of issues around sexual orientation and gender identity and gender-based violence? Is our culture accepting? Are we inclusive, or are we excluding other groups? In terms of inclusive environment, our language, the language that we use, is our language gender sensitive? Language can be a tool of exclusion and inclusion. How are we using our language? Is it inclusive in terms of issues of human rights? And our spaces within our institutions, are they accommodating towards everyone? Number 3, we do a lot of campaigns as departments, as institutions. How inclusive is our messaging? Not only during 16 days of activism, but also our HIV and AIDS campaigns, gender-based violence campaigns, and even our Women's Month campaigns. Are we using a blanket approach? Because women are not a homogeneous group. We have diversity. We've got lesbian women, we've got straight women, we've got transgender women. We need to ensure that we are inclusive in our approach, in whatever intervention we are implementing in our departments during Women's Month. We must ensure that we include these categories of women. And number 4, do we have a complaints mechanism? If someone is mistreated, do we have a complaints mechanism? Is our environment conducive for that? That is something we need to ponder on. I've already spoken of gender responsive budgeting and gender mainstreaming. How inclusive is our strategic plan? How inclusive is our APP? Do we include gender perspectives? And lastly, are we open to having an anti-discrimination policy within our workplace? Are we intentional, on promoting gender equality, human rights within our institutions. The Commission for Gender Equality does a lot of work around this. In the interest of time, I will just mention to say that we are available to advise on this issue. The Commission does take complaints. We are a catalyst institution, meaning that if people are having complaints and they do not find joy within the mechanisms that are put in place in different institutions, they can come to the Commission and we can give them assistance on issues of gender discrimination. There's a lot of work that we have done around issues of LGBTQI plus communities, and there's a lot of work that we continue to do. Right now, we have put out a call to say that we need LGBTQI plus to come forward with their lived experiences and challenges that they experience, so that they can assist the Commission in ensuring that we put up a strategy on how we can call government to account on the different commitments that are made within our law. And lastly, my parting shot is this one. What is the use of a constitution if people cannot access their rights? What is the use of human rights if people are not experiencing these rights? Program Director, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope my talk was beneficial to this session. And please, my apologies for taking up too much time. It's the passion. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Thabang. I don't even want to dilute your presentation. Very powerful, left me with a lot of questions and a lot of work that we need to do as a department. And I appreciate the sentiment that you are there to come and walk this path with us as we transform our working environment to be that inclusive, so that when we develop those policies, they can be enjoyed. I just want to also, as you applaud the policies that government has approved, that we also have the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security that is very specific in terms of the vision that it has pronounced, that the vision is actually inclusive of a narrative that says we want to have a sustainable peace and security and equality, and that must be enjoyed by persons who are non-conforming. So it's very articulate, it's very clear in the vision of the National Action Plan, very clear about that. In opening a discussion, I saw that our Acting Chief Operation Officer is here. I just want to find out if Ms. Love, you have a few words that you want to say, and then I'll go into the chat section and then just take out comments and questions if there are any. And then I will allow then everybody to then maybe five people who would like to make comments or ask questions, and thereafter we'll then give it back to the presenters, and then we'll then close the session. So I'm going to now call Ms. Lobe, if you have words to share with us in this platform. I just want to recognize you in this meeting. Over to Ms. Lobe.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and let me thank you for the opportunity. I'm here to listen and to learn. I want to deal with this thing of people who are in management to want to say or to talk in every event. So I am here to learn and to listen, and I'm grateful that you have provided me with the opportunity to learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lobe. I'm now just going to go through the comment sections so that I can read some of the comments, and then if the presenters, the panelists can pick up some of the comments and the questions, and you can respond to them. Here's one: intersectionality aspect with regard to violence perpetuated against LGBTIQ plus people, among others, is when acts of violence are being reported to the police, who further victimize the violence. There is violence that takes place in the stations where one is supposed to be protected but has become a very in unfriendly place, hence many cases do not get reported. This is the experience most Black LGBTQI people, Black women, less educated people, especially in the rural areas. Police fail to investigate cases related to LGBTQI plus people, and in most cases, the reasons are connected to how they perceive them or feel like the LGBTQI issues are against their religion. And a follow-up one that say may we please try and change our language by adopting a more inclusive language. I think the issue of language there is coming up, and then you can hear that a lot of us are really struggling with the usage of a proper language. Misguided violence, misgendering is violence on its own, indeed. Thokozani, I'm THB Abraham Ngoni, the acting deputy national coordinator for the Traditional Healers Organization, and thanks for the invitation. This was an introduction and also appreciation. The comments there. I would now open it to the audience participants. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? If you can raise your hands, or you can just unmute your mic and then make a comment. Then I'll recognize you. I saw a hand. Just go ahead, unmute your mic, and then you can speak and direct those to, even if you make your own contribution. Thank you. Yes, Tomet, you can go ahead. I hope I read your name correctly. Please go ahead. You need to unmute yourself if you are making a contribution so that we can hear you.
Are you directing it to me? I'm Valencia.
Yes, please.
Oh, good afternoon, guys. My name is Valencia. I'm from the Eastern Cape, from an organization called Social Inclusion, LGBTQI. One of the comments that I would like to make is that as much as sometimes we feel that in the Eastern Cape, when it comes especially to the LGBTQI matters and intersectionality, especially with women that are actually Black women, we found that yes, we are most of the time very discriminated because most of the resources, truly, as our first speaker indicated, who are we exactly talking about it in that specific groups? Most of the time, the resources, especially when it comes to health, they are focused on gays and transgender women. And also the issues where our minister from the police steps, we actually experienced also in terms of accountability, in terms of response from the police when it comes to LGBTQI issues and those that have been evicted, that they are not being attended professionally and actually in a manner that is very respectful and in promotion of human rights. We have that as well. And also when our Minister of Police talked about the green shelters that are fighting for them because this is new, especially that we work closely with the Department of Social Development. This has never been, because now we had a workshop currently that some of the shelters, especially from the Department of Social Services, they having issues when they have to take, for an example, a transgender woman into their shelters that has been abused by probably like their partner, because now it comes to a problem that they can't accommodate that person with actually the other women or with other groups there, because other women feel threatened about that. And then there are no provisions that are set into place into making sure that the person that has been a victim of GBV in that circumstances, if he's a transgender, where does that person go? How could we assist that person? It's a roaming around. And actually, that is another secondary victimization to the person that has experienced that GBV. And also, I would like to also engage with our minister, Usepso. Sorry if I'm on it, that it is quite important for especially in our community, especially in the Eastern Cape, that they involve and they engage with LGBTQI organizations. And actually, if it could be possible that you find transparency, what is actually happening, what are their intervention, what are their methods that they are using into making sure that they are working with us LGBTQI organizations in trying to assist within the GBV, within other spectrums that are there, business, work, employment, less discrimination and prejudice that are actually being faced in the community of LGBTI in the Eastern Cape. And we need to sit down and have those strategic plans with the SAPS that can be documented and also be followed, that this needs to be done according to this and this. And in actually doing this, you need to be inclusive with other organizations, with other women sectors, with other LGBTQI sectors, in order for it to be something like one meeting also once off, and then it's done. And then we're going to hear about it next year or 5 years from now on, that there was a meeting of this sort, and now our way forward was this and this, and then it broke down, and now we have new people that are being replaced to carry on this. It is very exhausting. We need consistency, transparency, accountability, and better leadership, so that we can be able to condemn such issues that are really dysfunctional in our communities. I'm Valencia Twalo from Sector Business Social Inclusion in Gqeberha. Thank you.
Thank you, Valencia. Thank you. I've noted as well, there's a Thomet from Johannesburg. Thomet, I'm giving you the opportunity.
Thank you, Chairperson. Hey, the last time I had network challenges. I think this time I'm more audible.
You are very audible.
Okay, Thokozani Bokoko. I'm Abraham Ngoni from the Traditional Healers Organization. The newly appointed acting national deputy coordinator. Our role as an organization, I'm just going to be stating facts that we are doing as an organization, and the implementations of the traditional health practitioners in terms of fighting the scourge of gender-based violence and the exclusion of intersex people. What we do as an organization, first and foremost, as we all know that we are representing traditional healers. These traditional healers are hereby then have a program of training, of which this program of training is mainly looking into the provisions of gender development for a person. And that I think and believe that is why a lot of people would say, why umuntu maqeda ukuthwasa then becomes homosexual. It's because we are empowering these people to better understand themselves before wanting to know about someone telling them, you might be gay or you might be homosexual like that or this and that. But let me talk about the organization and the entire sector is the fact of we've managed to build a society of people that is less discriminative, because in an essence of when you teach someone about gender development, it means that you live in your space of being judgmental to say, I may not be in line with your sexual preferences or your likes and dislikes, but I come to a point whereby I see the need for you to be yourself. And this also includes the patients that are using, or let me say the people that are using the services of traditional health practitioners, because these people, like it, siba train, which you need to first love yourself, acknowledge yourself. Before ukuthi uzophumela ngaphandle ufuna ukuthandwa omunye umuntu, ufuna acceptance komunye umuntu. So I believe the entire sector yethu as traditional healers, it's more accommodative. However, there are those smaller loopholes in terms of femicide, because I think we've all seen the issues of what you call the femicide killings, but at the end they would say it's what witchcraft murders, and and as an organization, we would like to condemn that act. We would say, in no way does healing mix with human body parts. Asikwenzi lokho esabelaphi bendabuko. Abantu abenza lokho siye sithi si-organization ababoshwe.
Okay.
The other thing that we normally face as a challenge as an organization is the issue of the witchcraft, in fact, false witchcraft assumptions made by the public. Mostly, it becomes the women who are traditional healers, and it's the people who are in the community of LGBTQI plus communities. And this happens because you find that as a particular individual would just start those false accusations, and we've engaged in social development, and it has failed us this month. Because in an essence, even the ICPS, there is a place in Helena. We did something, we made awareness. It's now Helena, that place is called Baloi Village. This village, abantu abathathwa from one place to the other, which bayodisplacewa lapho. Balahlekelwa imizi, balahlekelwa amakhaya. In an essence, even the culture malpractice was then used as an excuse for ukuthi abantu laba basuswe lapho kokuthi omunye umthola ukuthi uyi-gay, bathi akabelong kulo mphakathi loyo, unamoya wobudimoni, unani omunye uyi-intersex. One of the people who lives there or abantu laba ama-members wethu abathwasile. So lesicelako kakhulu, sicela ukuthi kube ne-facilitation between uhulumeni, especially social development in SAPS, ukuthi asekube nendlela yokuxhumanisa le two, ukuthi abantu laba bathole i-recourse. Because nanathi siyagcelaza kakhulu, sigcina siyinhlangano engasebenzeli abantu bayo because uhulumeni nomthetho wakhe akasebenzeli thina.
Okay. Thank you, Methomel, for sharing the work that you do, and also indicating areas where you will need support. Before I hand over to the panelists, I want to give an opportunity for one last time to any one person who wants to ask a question or make a comment, even as I go to the comment section as well to try and read. I see a comment from our ambassador in Cotonou, Ambassador Marx, who appreciates the platform. Let me just read the comment in the comment section. We are still a long way off from bringing the issue of intersectionality from the margins to the center. This issue has been ignored for far too long. We agree very much with that. Very pleased with this initiative beyond the old narrow binary of women and men. Thanks to the organizers for this initiative. Thank you, Ambassador. Indeed, we have a long way to go. And then there are also contacts for those of you who have requested contacts. They are there in the comments in the chat column. I see a hand. I don't know if this is an old hand or a new hand. Let me now give an opportunity.
It's a new hand. It's a new hand.
With a new hand. Whose hand is it? So we can't see.
It's Virginia Magwaza from the
Go ahead,
office.
Go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this webinar, which is very important. And thank you to the panelists. My point is, I think intersectionality is very crucial because we look at the LGBTIQ plus people in most cases and just only look at them in terms of their sexuality or gender identity, and also their sex characteristics, which is what the I stands for. But we don't look at the fact that within the LGBTI community, which is not a homogeneous group. There are issues of disability. There are issues of people who identify as women. There are issues of race. And I think Dr. Rudo put it very well. But I want to emphasize on the point around young LGBTIQ plus people who are still questioning their sexuality and also facing their adolescent stage. And I know that there are a lot of challenges with them because they confuse what they are going through, especially in how they should relate with their parents and families in terms of what is it that is happening with them and how they relate to it themselves before they can relate it to the people next to them. So I think we need to look into the intersectional issue in a very broad way and begin to tap into the points where we really need to do intervention, because we only talk about sexuality, and which becomes just about these people who just have sex differently and without understanding the fact that they are also human beings, and hence we talk about human rights of LGBTI people rather than LGBTI rights, because they are not special, but they are also part of the broader human race. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am now going to give our panelists an opportunity to respond to some of the comments if there is any need to respond to some. And also give you an opportunity as well to say, as you make a comment in response, also try and make your closing remarks. And I will then give an opportunity to Dr. Chigudu. I started with you, so I will then go back and start with you again if you have any response to some of the comments that I've made, and also to your own closing remarks. Thank you very much. Dr. Chigudu?
Thank you very much. Thank you for what feels like a really rich and necessary conversation. I just want to hop on the last point that was made by Virginia, because I think that's a critical issue. So one of the instances where we see progress, right, is when people talk about the youth, and we're talking about comprehensive sexuality education, for instance. And then you find that people will say we need to talk about access to condoms. We need to talk about access to contraception with adolescents. However, to talk about sexual orientation with this category remains insanely taboo. So it is okay to deal with the heterosexual needs or concerns when people are worried about teenage pregnancies and. So there's this attending to those needs within that frame. So we say there's progress, we say there's an acknowledgement of the broadness of sexuality. And yet you'll still find when we come into smaller issues, the spaces start to close again. So I just want to say thank you for highlighting that issue, because when we do come to the youth or adolescents, then spaces closes completely, because the attitude in general is that to talk about sexual orientation with young people is to recruit or to direct their sexuality. So for me, I think it's really just to reinforce the idea that indeed intersectionality needs to be increasingly centralized, and to think about it, really break it down into small pieces, because also to talk about it as a lump, we can also miss many opportunities. But the real cause is whatever issue we are dealing with, can we think about who is being left out, or who is being left out when we're having any discussion on anything? So when we say access to resources, when we say access to comprehensive education, when we say access to justice, when we when we say whatever it is that we are talking about, can we constantly think about who is it that we are leaving out when we are having this conversation, and to be more intentional and deliberate about that inclusion, and adding that layer of nuance when we think about it. But once again, thank you very much to you and everyone else.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chigudu, for your closing remarks. I will now give an opportunity to Mewen Chueman. Over to you to respond to some of the comments and questions that have been raised, and also use this opportunity to also do closing remarks.
Thank you for the opportunity that has been provided to me. I think most of the comments that were made were comments to say that we have to look at our policies, our acts, our activities to be inclusive, which I think the speaker and the notes that we received from the ambassador saying we still have a long way to go in embracing and making sure that the other categories of the LGBTI community are actually included. I'm the first to admit that I think we've been generic thinking that when we talk about gender-based violence, we are talking about the other communities that are excluded, not intentionally so, but they tend to be generalized with the other groupings of people. And I think what I'll take from this meeting is to go back to especially the areas that I highlighted as our function, research and policy development, legislation, partnering and partnerships and stakeholder, and monitoring and evaluation, and say, in your activities, as we oversee SAPS, are the LGBTI communities fully included? So that's what I'll take home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Wechuema, for your closing remarks, and even addressing some of the issues that were raised. Indeed, there were general comments of the work that lies ahead, directed to our own policing system. I will now give to Tshepang Mokhoteng to also just give closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, and thank you, and we welcome all the comments. In my closing remarks, I will just make a few points, aligning them to the comments that were made. The first comment was from Valencia. Thank you so much, Valencia. We could sense the passion in your voice. It was so palpable that you are very passionate about this issue, and you called for a more responsive SAPS. And I think this is the right platform. And I would also request for you to link up with our office in the Eastern Cape. It's in East London, but I've written the numbers on the chat box, because we need those experiences that you were sharing. I think the greatest challenge is that there is no readily available data and information around the challenges, documented information around the challenges that LGBTQI+ people experience when they try to access services in the hospital, in the clinics, at SAPS, at the courts, and so forth. So please, please, please do link up with our Eastern Cape office. And if you have complaints, we do take up complaints as the Gender Commission for further investigation. If you do not find joy in how SAPS has responded to your complaint or case, you can lodge your complaint in our Eastern Cape office. The number is there on the chat box. And also you called for an integrated approach in terms of response. Just to mention that the Department of Women, I think 2 weeks back, were in the Eastern Cape establishing rapid response teams. I think maybe you should link up with the OSW unit in the Office of the Premier in the Eastern Cape, because they are leading in terms of coordinating rapid response teams at local level in different municipalities. So it will be prudent that your organization becomes part of that, because that will assist in the speedy reporting and resolution of complaints and a more comprehensive approach in terms of response. And also, Tomed, thank you so much for the work that you're doing around education, and you've called around a multi-sectoral approach on issues of human rights and gender equality and LGBTQI+. And you've called for better partnership and more partnership with the Department of SAPS and DSD. I think the organizers of this important gathering can then take it further, because I said I would hope that this is not a talk shop, can then link you up with different stakeholders within your vicinity. And then Virginia spoke about how intersectionality should include issues of disability and young and questioning. This is critical. And Doctor has already spoken on comprehensive sexuality education. I want to take it further to say that we need parents, we need school governing bodies to come to the party on issues of comprehensive sexuality education. Comprehensive sexuality education, it's not introducing children to sex or initiating them to sex, but it's about teaching them responsibilities, about teaching them about normal development, and for them to have an understanding of what's happening to their bodies, what's happening to their surroundings, what's happening when a person develops and grows up, what is normative development in terms of adolescence and so forth. So we need parents and school governing bodies to come to the party, especially because the Department of Basic Education has put out a policy on how children can access contraceptives within the schooling sector. So we need parents to come to the party, because in reality, we have a serious challenge, not only of teenage pregnancy, also of abuse and bullying in terms of sexuality in the schooling sector. So my parting shot is that program director and everyone who is in this platform from the Commission for Gender Equality, I am grateful that I was part of this, and I'm making a promise that I will be knocking at your doors, trying to ensure that there is some sort of something that comes out of this engagement, because a lot of rich information was shared, a lot of ideas were shared in this session, so we need to move from rhetoric to implementation. So my colleagues within the Commission for Gender Equality, I know you are working very well with my sister from the Commission, Dieketseng. She's worked with you around the issues of women and peace. So me and her will be working together to ensure that we continuously knock on the door of DERCO to see what is it that you're doing over and above this engagement. And also, thank you again for inviting us and for giving us this opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it goes without saying that the partnership and the panelists that we have here are actually very rich. I mean, in terms of you're a research resource and even training partners. We do the work that we do as DERCO because we have you as our partners, the Center for Human Rights, the Commission for Gender Equality, the Police Secretariat. We have been working with you over the years and over the months in developing some of our policies. And now that we are entering this space where we don't want to just be talking about an inclusive working environment and even policies, that we have you on board and we really appreciate this relationship, and we appreciate your input. And as you said, Tsepang, we are going to continue to call you so that we as we go ahead in looking and reviewing our policies, we make sure that we put all this talk into practice. We know that with the coming into force of the Convention C190, which has created an opportunity for government to review its policies on sexual harassment to include harassment and violence in the place of work. That gives us an opportunity now to also include an intersectional approach to how we do our work. So we will be able to call upon you to do some work. Now I'm going to call upon Mr. Mnangagwa, who is our Director for Gender and Diversity Management, to then give us closing remarks. Just before I hand over to Mr. Mnangagwa, I just want to then read the last comments in our chat. Comprehensive sexual education, an important component of promotion of human rights. Can I step out for no, the other one is just asking to go out for a few minutes. But basically that was the last comment. And over to you, Mnangagwa, even as we close this session, and thank our attentive participants and our very informed panelists who have given us a lot of information and have really empowered us. I, for one, have learned a lot. I had a number of questions in terms of how we approach this issue of intersectionality, and I think I have a lot of information to work with going forward. Mr. Mnangagwa, over to you.
Thank you, Program Director, Excellencies, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It is my singular honor to be part of this meeting and to be entrusted with giving the closing remarks. I won't reiterate my name. My name has been spelled out and the designation. Today's topic is not only important but complex due to how the discourse around the rights of the persons belonging in the LGBTQI+ community has been polarized. We see it at global level, where it's often a claim that by promoting and defending their rights, we are creating a new set of human rights that are elaborating the international human rights instruments. The panelists today reminded us that persons in the LGBTQI+ community should not only be seen through the lens of their sexual orientation and gender equality, the different categories of discrimination such as sex, nationality, race, class, ethnicity, disability, age, and others apply to them as well. Our history as a country makes it easy to understand racial discrimination as it is an existential issue. The dual economy created by the apartheid policies help us understand class politics, and the racialized poverty which defines experiences of many in the country is the intersectional point that influences many of our policies as government. We also know that women and children are disproportionately affected by this inequality. However, when it comes to the LGBTQI+ interest, the discussion becomes more polarized. We have seen how religion and culture have been used to justify their discrimination. The gender stereotypes and negative social norms not only makes it difficult for the community persons to live their lives as citizens protected by constitutional rights, but exposes them to various forms of discrimination and violence. The South African Constitution is premised on the commitment on the fundamental principles of the promotion of human dignity, equality, non-discrimination of all persons, and a quest for universal justice. South Africa views respect for the promotion, protection, and fulfillment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms as a critical pillar of our domestic and foreign policy. The principles of our Constitution is guided by a commitment to build a society that transcends a history of discrimination and violence based on race, sex, gender, religion, origin, and sexual orientation. Our constitutional principles also reflect the need to undo the legacy of systemic social and economic exclusion of all previously marginalized communities, in particular in how we provide social protection services. Notwithstanding the above progressive and robust legislative and policy frameworks, South Africa continues to grapple with the challenges facing the LGBTQI community, including in the area of broader access to services. As a department, we use South Africans' membership to different organizations at regional, continental, and global level to advance the human rights without discrimination. We recognize that we don't always have allies in this space, but our unwavering commitment continues to shape the international norms and standards that are progressive. 27 years into South African democracy, SA has managed to develop liberal and progressive legislation and policy frameworks aimed at giving maximum protection against discrimination. This anniversary offers South Africa an opportunity to reflect and review our implementation efforts and how we can better strengthen partnerships with relevant stakeholders, including civil society, the private sector, to accelerate and give practical effect to the commitments made in our Constitution. South Africa is a diverse nation, and equality does not mean uniformity or that we are all the same. Our country's motto, Diverse People Unite, calls on all of us to build a common sense of belonging and national pride, celebrating the very diversity which makes us who we are. It also calls on us to extend our friendship and warmth to all nations and the people of the world in our endeavor to build a better world. President Ramaphosa once said that South Africa cannot tolerate discrimination against any person on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity. The violation of the rights and equal worth of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or intersex people demeans our common humanity as South Africans. He continued that not only does it expose individuals to pain, suffering, and even violence, but it often limits access to social services and economic opportunities for the community in our country. Reiterating that it is not possible to build just and equal society in such circumstances, it is our responsibility to dedicate every moment to eradicate all forms of racism, of sexism, of tribalism, homophobia, and other intolerances. Our commitments in the 2030 agenda remain empty if they are not based on inclusivity, and non-discrimination, including in how we protect and promote human rights for all, without discrimination of any kind. On behalf of the COO and DERCO, I would like to thank all the participants, panelists, for being part of this important conversation. I thank you.
Thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned. Those of you who want to turn on your cameras, you can do that for this 1 minute. And on that note, thank you very much for tuning in. The meeting is adjourned. Yes. Thanks, Sepam Valencia. Great. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye, Metipsy. Bye, Dr. Chigudu. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you're muted. Mewe Nchoma, you muted yourself.
I was saying I can actually give you the contact details of those people who you can complain about police conduct. I'll give them to you, then you can give it to the group.
Thank you very much. I think also if you have your speech, your presentation, you can send it to us so that we can distribute it. I know that they will come and ask for it. Tebang as well, Dr. Chigudu, what you have presented, if you can share with me through an email, I know that they will come and ask for it, then we will be able to share it with them. Thank you.